Before you continue watching, I need you to stop for a moment because what you're about to hear directly challenges decades of common medical advice. For years, most people have been told that eating before bed is a bad idea. It supposedly leads to weight gain, ruins your sleep, and disrupts digestion. But what if the full picture is very different for people over 60? What if going to bed without the right nutrients isn't harmless at all, but instead slowly contributes to damage inside one of the most important organs you have, your brain? This isn't about fear, and it's not speculation. It's based on growing scientific evidence that many people have never been told about. And I want to be very clear from the start, this is about protection, not panic. My name is Dr. William Lee, and for more than 3 decades, I've worked at the intersection of nutrition, aging, and brain function. I've seen thousands of patients move through their later years, and one pattern has become increasingly clear. What you eat in the evening, especially in older age, has a much deeper impact than most people realize. Tonight, we're going to look at specific foods that, when eaten before sleep, don't just support the brain, but actively help protect it, repair it, and maintain it during the night when your body's most vulnerable. And one of the most surprising parts of all of this is that the most powerful food on this list is probably already sitting in your kitchen right now. Most people completely overlook it, not realizing how significant its effects can be on brain health during sleep. But before we get there, there is a study that completely changes how we should think about aging and nutrition. Researchers from the University of California, San Francisco published findings in the journal Nature Aging showing something alarming. Adults over 65 who had even mild deficiencies in certain essential nutrients experienced brain aging that appeared, on average, 11 years ahead of their actual biological age. That means someone who is 68 could potentially have brain function resembling that of someone nearly a decade older if their nutritional intake is lacking. What makes this even more important is when it happens. The brain doesn't operate in isolation overnight. During sleep, your body is no longer receiving fresh nutrients. It must rely entirely on what you consumed earlier in the day to maintain repair processes, regulate inflammation, and support neural function. If that nutritional foundation is weak, the brain spends the night essentially running on limited resources while still trying to perform critical maintenance work. Over time, this gap can quietly accumulate. So before we go deeper, I want to invite you into this conversation personally. Take a moment and think about your own routine. How old are you? And what do you usually eat before going to bed, if anything at all? Share it in the comments. I read them. And your experience may help someone else realize they're not alone in what they're going through. Now, let's begin the breakdown, starting from number 5 and working our way up to the most important food on this list. Each one is backed by research and chosen specifically for how it interacts with the aging brain during sleep. Because what works in your 30S is not necessarily what supports you in your 60S or beyond. Your biology changes and your nutritional needs change with it. That difference matters more than most people realize. Starting at number 5, we have tart cherry juice. At first glance, many people dismiss it as just another health trend or something athletes drink for recovery, but the science behind it tells a much deeper story. Tart cherries, especially the Montmorency variety, naturally contain compounds that influence sleep regulation, including one of the very few plant based sources of melatonin. But its benefits don't stop at sleep quality alone. In controlled clinical research, particularly a double blind trial conducted at Louisiana State University and published in the American Journal of Nutrition, older adults who consumed tart cherry juice twice daily experienced noticeable improvements in sleep duration and efficiency, gaining over an hour of additional sleep per night on average. But what makes this especially relevant for brain health is what happened inside the body at the same time. Researchers observed a measurable reduction in inflammatory markers such as interleukin 6 and tumor necrosis factor, both of which are strongly linked to neuroinflammation. This is important because neuroinflammation is one of the silent drivers of cognitive decline. It refers to a low level, ongoing inflammatory state inside the brain that gradually damages neurons responsible for memory, focus, and emotional balance. As we age, the protective barrier around the brain becomes slightly more permeable, allowing inflammatory molecules to enter more easily. During sleep, when the brain should be repairing itself, these inflammatory processes can quietly continue if the body is already in a stressed or inflamed state. Tart cherry juice helps counter this through anthocyanins, powerful plant compounds that can cross into brain tissue and act as antioxidants directly where damage occurs. Studies from institutions such as the University of Delaware have also linked regular consumption of tart cherry products with improvements in memory performance, particularly in older adults experiencing early cognitive changes. Practically speaking, the approach is simple but important. Unsweetened tart cherry juice, specifically the 100% Montmorency type, should be consumed in small amounts, typically around 4 to 8 ounces, about half an hour to an hour before sleep. It's important to avoid versions with added sugar since that changes the metabolic effect entirely. For even better absorption of its active compounds, pairing it with a small amount of healthy fat, such as a few walnuts, can enhance how effectively those antioxidants are utilized by the body. And that leads directly into the next food on the list, one that works surprisingly well alongside it, but plays a completely different role in protecting the aging brain during the night. Building directly on that, the next food works in a completely different way, but becomes even more powerful when combined with what we've just discussed. Walnuts may look simple, almost too simple to matter, but that is exactly why most people underestimate them. When you first hear about them as a brain food, it sounds like a general health claim, something you might casually agree with and then ignore. But when you look at what actually happens inside the aging brain, the picture becomes much more serious and much more specific. I want you to understand this through a real patient example because it makes the science feel real in a way numbers alone cannot. There was a woman named Margaret, 73 years old, living in Portland, who came in because of what she described as mental fog. Not dramatic memory loss, not a medical emergency, but a slow and frustrating decline in clarity. She would lose words mid sentence, forget why she entered rooms, and feel like her thinking was no longer sharp or reliable. What concerned her most wasn't a single symptom, but the feeling that she was slowly slipping away from her own mind. When we looked at her diet, there was nothing obviously harmful, but there was a clear gap. She was not consuming walnuts at all. It sounds minor, but over time, that absence matters more than people think. After introducing a consistent evening intake of walnuts, something very simple and deliberate, her progress over the following months was noticeable. When she returned after about half a year, she described a clear return of mental clarity to the point where she felt like herself again. The emotional impact of that change was significant for her, not just physically, but psychologically. Now, while individual stories are not the same as scientific proof, they often reflect what research later explains more clearly. Large scale studies, including data involving thousands of participants, have shown that regular walnut consumption is associated with better performance in memory recall, processing speed, and cognitive flexibility. In simpler terms, people who eat walnuts regularly tend to think faster, remember more clearly, and adapt mentally with greater ease as they age. The reason behind this effect becomes especially important after 60. Walnuts are one of the richest plant sources of a fatty acid called ALA, which belongs to the omega 3 family. This matters because your brain is largely made of fat, and those fats are not static. They are constantly being rebuilt, especially during sleep. Every night, your brain is essentially repairing and remodeling its own structure, including the membranes that surround neurons, which directly influence how efficiently brain cells communicate. As we age, the body becomes less efficient at converting plant based omega 3 sources into the specific forms the brain uses most effectively. This means the quality of the raw materials you provide through food becomes more important, not less. Walnuts help fill that gap by supplying these essential building blocks in a ready to use form. But there is another layer that makes walnuts even more interesting. They contain natural compounds that have been studied for their role in slowing the buildup of certain proteins in the brain that are associated with age related cognitive decline. When people think about brain aging, they often imagine it as a simple slowdown, but on a biological level, it is also about accumulation, stress, and reduced cleanup processes. Walnuts appear to support the brain in managing some of these processes more efficiently over time. Practically speaking, the approach is very straightforward. A small portion, roughly a handful or about 1 ounce in the evening, is enough to make a meaningful difference over time. It is not about large quantities or extreme habits, but consistency. And when combined with tart cherry juice from the previous step, the effect becomes even more interesting because they support different systems that operate during sleep. One related to inflammation and sleep regulation, and the other related to structural repair and cognitive maintenance. Now, moving forward, the next food is where things start to surprise most people. Because unlike walnuts or cherries, this one is not usually associated with brain health at all. In fact, many people overlook it completely in discussions about nutrition and aging. But the evidence behind it suggests that it plays a far more important role in nighttime brain recovery than most would expect. That brings us directly to number three. At number three, we come to a food that genuinely surprises most people when they first hear it in this context because it doesn't usually get connected with brain health at all. Yet, when you look at controlled research and the biological processes involved in sleep, the evidence becomes very difficult to ignore. Kiwi fruit may seem like a simple everyday fruit, something light and almost casual in your diet, but its impact on sleep quality and overnight brain recovery has been studied in a more serious way than most people realize. In a controlled study conducted at Taipei Medical University, adults who struggled with falling asleep were asked to consume 2 kiwis about 1 hour before bed each night over the course of several weeks. The results showed consistent and measurable improvements. People fell asleep faster, total sleep time increased, and most importantly, the depth of sleep improved in a way that directly affects brain recovery. To understand why this matters so much, we need to look at what actually happens inside the brain during deep sleep. There is a system called the glymphatic system, which functions as the brain's overnight cleaning process. During the deepest stages of sleep, cerebrospinal fluid flows more actively through brain tissue, helping clear out metabolic waste that builds up during the day. This includes proteins and byproducts that, if left to accumulate over time, are strongly associated with age related cognitive decline. What makes this system so important is that it only works efficiently during deep, slow wave sleep. If sleep is shallow or fragmented, this cleaning process becomes less effective. Over years, that difference can matter significantly. Research from institutions such as the University of Rochester has shown that when slow wave sleep is reduced, this waste clearing system does not function at full capacity, which means the brain is less able to remove the substances it naturally accumulates each day. Kiwi fruit appears to support this process through several overlapping mechanisms. It contains natural compounds that help regulate sleep cycles, including precursors that influence serotonin production, which plays a key role in transitioning the brain into deeper sleep stages. It also contains folate, a nutrient that has been strongly linked in research to cognitive health in older adults. Deficiency in folate is surprisingly common in aging populations, even among people who believe their diet is adequate, and it has been associated with faster cognitive decline in multiple studies. Another important component in kiwi is lutein, a powerful antioxidant that can cross into brain tissue and accumulate in regions involved in processing speed and decision making. While lutein is often discussed in relation to eye health, its role in the brain is gaining increasing attention in nutritional neuroscience, particularly in aging populations where oxidative stress becomes more pronounced. From a practical perspective, the method of consumption is also more flexible than people expect. Eating 1 or 2 kiwis about an hour before bed has been shown to be effective in research settings. Interestingly, the skin contains a significant concentration of fiber and antioxidants, and in many cases, it can be consumed if properly washed, although blending is an alternative for those who prefer a smoother texture. Pairing kiwi with a small amount of protein, such as yogurt, can further support overnight brain processes because it provides amino acids that are used during sleep for repair and neurotransmitter balance. This is where the connection becomes even more interesting because the next food we move to works directly with this idea of overnight protein availability and brain maintenance. It shifts the focus from improving sleep quality to actively supporting the brain's ability to rebuild itself during that sleep. And that brings us to number two. At number two, we move into something that is often completely overlooked in conversations about brain health before sleep. Yet, it becomes increasingly important as we age. This is cottage cheese. And at first glance, it seems almost too simple to deserve serious attention. But once you understand what happens inside the body after 60, especially overnight, its importance becomes much clearer. To explain this properly, we need to talk about a condition known as anabolic resistance. This is not a phrase most people are familiar with, but it describes one of the most important biological shifts that occurs with aging. When you are younger, your body responds efficiently to dietary protein. It quickly breaks it down into amino acids and uses them to build and repair muscle, tissues, and even neural structures. This includes the proteins involved in neurotransmitter production, synaptic repair, and overall brain maintenance. However, as people move into their 60s and beyond, this response becomes less efficient. The same amount of protein produces a weaker biological effect than it once did. Research published in physiology journals shows that older adults often require significantly more protein to achieve the same level of muscle and tissue synthesis as younger individuals. This is not a minor detail. It changes how nutrition should be approached in later life. Now, why does this matter for the brain specifically? Because during sleep, your body enters a fasting state. For roughly 7 to 8 hours, there is no incoming energy or nutrients. In younger individuals, this is usually not a problem. The body handles it smoothly. But in older adults, particularly those over 65 or 70, this overnight fasting period can become a time where the body begins breaking down its own resources to maintain essential functions. This includes not just muscle tissue, but also the raw materials needed for neurotransmitter production and neural repair. Over time, if the body does not have enough available protein during this window, the brain may not receive a steady supply of the amino acids it needs to support optimal overnight function. This is where the risk of gradual decline becomes more relevant. Cottage cheese provides a very specific solution to this problem because of the type of protein it contains. It is rich in casein, a slow digesting protein that behaves very differently from fast proteins like whey. Instead of being absorbed quickly, casein forms a gel like structure in the stomach and releases amino acids gradually over several hours. This slow release aligns almost perfectly with the duration of sleep, meaning the brain and body continue to receive a steady supply of building blocks throughout the night. This steady amino acid delivery supports several important processes. It helps maintain the production of neurotransmitters such as serotonin and dopamine, which play roles in mood, motivation, and cognitive stability. It also provides the materials needed for cellular repair, including the maintenance of synapses, which are the connections that allow neurons to communicate effectively. Clinical research has shown that consuming casein protein before sleep can significantly increase overnight protein synthesis. While much of this research originally focused on muscle health, the same biological principle applies to the brain, which also relies on continuous repair and regeneration processes during sleep. From a practical standpoint, cottage cheese is also easy to incorporate into an evening routine. A moderate portion before bed can provide a sustained release of amino acids throughout the night. Some people combine it with small additions like cinnamon or fruit to improve taste and add antioxidant support, but the core benefit comes from the protein itself. When paired with foods like kiwi, it creates a complementary effect, combining sleep support with sustained nutritional delivery for overnight brain function. And finally, this brings us to the number one food, the one that often surprises people the most because it is so familiar, so commonly used, yet so rarely understood in this specific context of brain protection during sleep.